We'll now look at our main example, which is graduate outcomes versus government targets. This is mostly imaginary, so imagine that the government has decided to set targets based on the number of students completing credentials who say that work-integrated learning helped them find a job after graduation. This doesn't actually happen currently, so we're going to have to make up some targets for the purpose. We begin by leveraging the example we went through previously, which connected to a data source as a CSV file, removed some unnecessary fields, and converted our value to a percentage where appropriate. The last step of our workflow was to write the output to a database. Picking up where we left off, let's go to Tableau Prep. We're now going to continue where we left off in Tableau Prep Builder with our simple example. In this context, we had a data source, which was a local CSV file. We had a conversion step, which consisted of removing some fields and altering the value field so that it would display a percentage actually as a percentage, or as a decimal number in this case. Last but not least, we wrote our output table to a database, the result of which we see here in the list of tables. Moving on, we're now going to complete the more complex main example. I'm going to move this output step up visually just for consistency with other images that you've seen. I'm then going to add a new clean step, which creates a new branch. The first one that I want to create deals with our percent fields. What we're going to do here is we're going to find the UOM, or unit of measure field, right-click, and keep only those ones that are percent-based. Once we've done that, we're going to make another branch. Hit the same plus button you did previously to add a new clean step. In this case, we're going to keep number fields, so I'm going to filter the same UOM field, and this time select number. The next thing I'm going to do is double-click on value and rename it to total graduates. I can see now that my total graduates here is what was previously known as value, but it's numeric based, not percentage. Next, I want to join these two streams of data back together again. In the case of this data set, there's a lot more rows of data in the percent fields than in the numeric. We can see here that there's about 3,000 rows of data in the numeric ones and about 12,000 in the percent base. This is because there's 4 different fields that are percentage based and only one that is numeric based. What we're going to do is we're going to join these two together. And to do this, I'm going to drag number fields on top of percent fields and then a little bit to the right to select the join. What I can see based on the green highlighting here and here is that percent is my table on the left. Because there's more of them, I'm going to make sure that I use a left join here so that I don't end up excluding any results. Tableau used an educated guess to figure out which fields are the common keys between the two data streams. It picked ref date, which is a good start, but it's not everything that we need. I'm going to hit the plus button here and add more conditions. We're going to select DGUID, field of study, geo, level of study, and sex. It runs off the bottom of the screen, but if you scroll down, you can see it. Once Tableau has combined our data, what we're going to see is we're going to see join results over in the pane on the right down here. Notice that our total graduates field appears first, and then we have a bunch of fields that have this green underline that come from our percent flow. Apologies. And then as we scroll further to the right, we get to these gray underlined ones. If we hover over any of these, we can see that they have a -1 on their name. So I'm going to select these, all of the ones that have -1, right-click and hit remove. You can select multiples by holding down the Shift key when you select. We've now made our first join, and we can see that the join result is 11,880, just as we were hoping. With my join complete, I'm going to add another clean step so that we can add another calculated field. For this one, I'm going to click on calculated field, and I'm going to name this as number of graduates. The calculation itself is our total graduates field times the value, which remember is now a percentage basis. I'm going to name this step will calculation, and I'm also going to add a description for removes UOM. On that note, I'll select the two UOM fields, right-click, and hit remove. Now that we have our data assembled much the way we want, with both a percent basis in the value field and a numeric basis in the number of graduates that we just calculated. We can then go on to our next step. In this case, we want to pivot our data so that our different measures are different columns rather than different rows. I'm going to hit the plus button here, and I will select Pivot. I'm going to name this one as Pivot%. Once I've done that, I want to change the default behavior for the pivot from columns to rows to columns. I will then scroll to the right and find the Statistics field. I want to drag this onto the fields that I'm going to pivot to columns. The value field is going to be aggregated. Once we've done that, we can also remove both the number of graduates and total graduates fields. Those are at the beginning. Right-click on them, hit Remove. We're now going to repeat the same process for our number of graduates data. So I'm going to hit the plus button one more time, and I'm going to add another pivot. For consistency, I'm going to drag it down to the bottom channel here, and I'm going to name this as Pivot Number Grads. Just as I did before, I'm going to change from columns to rows to columns. Once I've done that, I'm going to find the Statistics field, and I'm going to drag it over to the field that I'm going to pivot. Unlike before, I'm not going to use the value field though, so I'll drag the Statistics first, and then scroll all the way to the left, and the field that I want to aggregate in this case is the number of graduates that we calculated previously. Once I've done that, I can remove my total graduates field and my value field. My next step is going to be to aggregate my data. So I'm going to go back up to the % one and hit plus and select aggregate. As with our joins, we want to group by all the dimensional fields. So I'll drag those ones onto group first, and then I want to sum my remaining fields related to work integrated learning. I don't need the number of rows aggregated for this purpose. Next, we can shorten up the names of our aggregate fields. So I'm going to name this first one, the job after graduation, will-job after graduation. Will-job after graduation percentage. This one is will mandatory, so we're going to name it will-required %. The next one is paid, so we'll name that as will-paid %. Last but not least is the participation one, so we'll double click on that and say will-participated %. Now that we've done that, we can name this step as aggregate %. To save ourselves some of the typing that we just did previously, we're going to duplicate this. There's two ways you can do it. You can hold down Control-C or Command-C on your keyboard. You can also right-click and say copy, and then right-click again and hit paste, or Control or Command-V. I'm going to drag this into the appropriate spot here, and I'm going to rename this as aggregate number. Once I've got that there, I'm then going to drag my previous number-based pivot onto my aggregate. You can see that Tableau accepted this right out of the gate, which is actually pretty good. What we can do now is just change our previously renamed fields from percentage basis to number basis. So add the letter N. Once we've done that, just as we had previously, we're going to join our two data streams back together again. So I'm going to drag the number one on top of the % one and select join. As previously, I'll make it a left join just to make sure we don't inadvertently lose any values, and I'm going to add the join conditions: DGUID, field of study, geo, level of study, and sex. Ref date was pre-populated for me. I can see now that I have 2,970 as expected. As with our previous join, I'm going to get rid of all of the -1 fields that I don't need. This just cleans up my flow a little bit. If I scroll over towards the right, I can see in blue here, we've got Geo1, RefDate1, etc., etc. I'm going to select all of these because they're duplicates of fields that came from the other stream. Right-click, hit remove. I'm now going to add another clean step. And for this clean step, I'm going to add information on when this data was updated. I'm going to call this data updated date and just use Tableau's built-in today function. I'm going to name this as date updated. So now we can see that it's November 26th of 2020. This could be helpful as we write this information into our database. Last but not least, we want to output some record level information to our database. But because this is government open data, there's lots of additional subtotals and the like that we may not need. So I'm going to add one more clean step here. What I'm going to do now, and I'll name this as record level, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some filters. None of the particular filters are particularly hard. What I want to do is I want to exclude Canada as a national total. The argument is that Tableau Desktop can sum up all the provinces on its own perfectly well. We don't need a total row embedded. We're then going to keep the total rows for a few others. So I'm going to keep all levels of study. And I will keep both sexes. And then I'm going to remove any of the all fields of study so that we can keep the individual ones. And that looks pretty good. So now we have our data assembled the way that we would like to write it to our database. We can scroll over or we can preview this. You could change the column order if you so wish so that the numeric values are on the end, but for the purposes of the demo, it doesn't matter too much to us. So let's add an output step and write this to our database. We'll name this output step db grads. What we're going to do is we're going to save it over here to a database table, just as we did before. Now, because we were already connected to our database, it should have the connection already available for us to select, which makes things a little bit easier. If not, you'll have to connect again. What we're going to do here is we're going to name the table National Graduates Survey. No spaces. Make sure to get the name right here because our follow-up steps when we show this in the Tableau workbook depend on this being right. So National Graduates Survey, no spaces. Once we create the new table, we can say that we want to create the table. Tableau is going to give us this warning message to say we're going to overwrite data every time that we run this workflow. For the purposes of a demo, this is intentional and totally fine. But if you're working in a production environment, you want to be really careful when you select this option. Now that we've got that, I can hit the play button up here, or the run flow button down here. They do the same thing for these purposes. Tableau is now going to run my workflow and publish the data to my database that's in Amazon Web Services. This took about 6 seconds. We can verify that it worked by hitting the refresh button, clicking on our data source on the left here, the refresh button's up at the top, and then we can see our National Graduate Survey data here. Last but not least, we want to publish some provincial targets, which of course don't exist.